Welcome to a new episode of Mind Your Mind. Today I have the pleasure to be with Aga Buckley. She is social work academic, registered social worker, social pedagogue, and doctoral researcher. She works in the Department of Social Work and Social Care at Kingston University in London, where she is leading a Master of Social Work program. Over more than 20 years of experience, she developed a keen interest in secondary traumatic stress and compassion fatigue in social work. And as you know, I'm Roxana Parra Sepúlveda, your host, and I'm really happy. Welcome, Aga.
Hi, Roxana. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. I mean, the theme of secondary traumatic stress and compassion fatigue is such a passion that we share. And it's so interesting that our path has crossed. And so I'm very grateful for you to be in this episode today, because we have so much to talk about these very interesting topics, and bearing in mind the newly qualified social workers, which is the main people that you are working with in your research. So shall we start it with understanding a little bit what has inspired you to do this research?
Roxana, we certainly share the passion for compassion fatigue and the interest in secondary traumatic stress. I think the short answer to your question would be most likely my own experience. That's what inspired it, and I would like to think that it continuously drives and motivates me to focus on this type of work. I work for many years in different settings as a frontline social worker, and mostly in mental health. And over the years, I supervised and supported a lot of newly qualified social workers. In latter years before moving to teaching, I was working very closely with newly qualified social workers in different settings, and I think that the theme that continuously followed me was the theme of newly qualified social workers struggles, the shame, the all of those feelings, very human feelings that were associated with the early years in practice. And I was worried in a sense that perhaps the profession, the social work profession as a whole, was not able to support the feelings and the emotions that were that were associated with the frontline practice. And I don't want to speculate whether we have tools and we're able to contain, and then there is such vast differences between different organizations and how they handle and support newly qualified staff. So I can't really speak for anyone in particular. But one thing that really struck me in my work over the years was the perhaps emphasis on professionalism, emphasis on meeting what we call in social work professional capability frameworks. And in that kind of framework focus and capability focus lens, which of course is very valid and important, because that creates it supports us with the ability to establish whether the person that is in a profession is actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, and they're in the right place. My worry was that the emotional side of it was very often perhaps pushed on the side and not necessarily explored or acknowledged or validated in a way that could be helpful for individual. Again, please bear in mind that my background is in mental health, so I may have the sort of acute focus in that direction, whereas this may not be necessarily something that social workers in different settings would necessarily straight away do. Although I would like to think that social work being a very relational profession, where one's well-being and feelings are a big part of what we do and how we work with people. So that's how I see the relevance. So yeah, the inspiration for this project came directly from my practice. My my practice, direct practice with newly qualified social workers, but also my own experiences of practice. And I would like to think my own experiences of compassion fatigue, and I'm not ashamed to say that out loud. I feel I had enough space and time to reflect on my own experience of practice, and yes, I acknowledge the fact that it's very likely that I had experienced compassion fatigue. It's very likely that I had a time in my practice where I was very close to burnout, if not burned out already.
Yes.
And looking back at those experiences, I feel that maybe this is the reason why I actually slightly changed the trajectory of my work over the years. And then, reflecting back at how I made my decisions and choices in terms of positioning myself in a profession, whether I continue working with people with little experience, or patients, as we refer to people we work with in mental health, and how I kind of how this kind of develop over the years. So it's very I would say intrinsic motivation there, but also now thinking, being in social work education over the last few years, I realized that there are things that I feel are missing in the way we educate social workers. And again, it might be controversial. I don't want to make any sort of enemies when making a broad statement like that. I don't want to get in trouble. But I think it's important to say that my worry is that while we work on teaching social work, we support students to develop their knowledge and understanding, I sometimes worry that there isn't enough space, or there isn't enough emphasis on teaching and expecting that those students develop ability to see where their mental health is being affected, ability to really develop skills that will help them to seek support. And you see what I mean? I think that these elements that, and I strongly feel about it, that they are very much taken for granted. There is a broad assumption that, oh, that's something that people will do on an individual basis, that they will have to cope. So
yes, thank you for such a candid answer. I really, really appreciate it, because you're touching in so many elements. Naturally, when we are starting to start a new career, we are quite focused on the development of skills. But what I'm hearing from what you say is that to work on the development of the skills to do your job well is not something that is an either or it goes necessarily against having as well an awareness and a sense of understanding as well of the emotional well-being that will be necessary as well to do your job, because the very characteristic of your work as a social worker is a relational aspect. No, you are working with people, and for so many that work in the front line, like advisors and other people that are constantly in that relationship with their clients, service users, patients, in whichever way they are calling them, right?
I prefer people.
Yeah, and the people that are suffering for a reason, right? So how much importance then it is there for that element of self-awareness, no, that you were talking about. You to have that moment to reflect, to look back, to think about yourself, how this is affecting me, because that also brings the very question that you were posing about what is an opportunity for the training organizers. No, is an opportunity for those that are thinking on how the training could be done or improved, or what it is that probably where the gaps may be, that are talking about really to make it even better. And include not only the hard skills and all the information that they need to grasp, but also to have the emotional skills,
Mhm.
to work from a nurture place.
Yeah, Roxana, I think there is this understanding that one of the most important skills social workers will have to develop during um, the 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 courses, the training at the universities, is the ability to reflect. Now,
Uh-huh.
it's quite difficult to put, to measure one's ability to reflect. I'm not saying that it's impossible, it is possible. But I wonder whether, whether we sometimes, we focus on social work, on or students' ability to see what happens in a situation they're dealing with, focus on perhaps how they react to certain things. But my worry in there is that, or maybe not a worry, but my question would be there, is there enough scope and space to explore the self-awareness, to explore own emotions, to explore ability to name what's going on with you right now,
Uh-huh.
physically,
Mm-hmm.
emotionally, and this sort of really focused inwards, the ability to talk about it. Now, I'm not saying necessarily that it goes on one side, that we put the emphasis only on that student or a newly qualified social workers. There's something about the ability to facilitate that space
Yes. Mm-hmm.
from the supervisor and from
Mm-hmm.
the practice educator, whoever's working with it, with that newly qualified social worker. And I think that's probably the part I mostly observed in practice, where I felt that sometimes the sort of emotional load of what is happening in practice could be so overwhelming for the person who's experiencing it, but it could be also equally very overwhelming for the supervisor, who may
Uh-huh.
not have a scope and ability to hold it, or offer the space where the person is able to, to talk about it. Now, please do not take me wrong, because I'm not talking about a therapeutic space. I'm not talking
Mm-hmm. No.
supervisors having a therapeutic with newly qualified session. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is offering a safe space in which a newly qualified social worker will be able to seek validation of what they're experiencing, and proactive, effective ways of managing what is happening with them, ways that could be introduced and supported by the
Yes.
very organizations they're working for. Um,
Absolutely.
so yeah, again, this may be idealistic on my part.
I hope no, it's not. I'm with you.
It also stems from my understanding and knowledge of mental health services, and you see, it's maybe something to do with how social work profession is being perceived by by services, by general public even. If in comparison, if you compare a trainee psychologist or trainee therapist in NHS services, they would receive clinical supervision. They will receive managerial supervision on very regular basis by trained people who are able to support them in many sort of different levels. And very often when I'm talking about therapists who are working for primary care services, but so for very sort of generic service on a sort of GP level, whereas
Mm-hmm.
we will have mental health social workers working for secondary mental health
Mm-hmm.
services, the
Mm-hmm.
sort of a higher tier services, where you would only work with people who have severe and enduring mental illness that will require specialist sort of intervention and specialist support. Yet those social workers will not necessarily receive uh, uh, not only very regular supervision, but there would be the clinical element might be actually missing there completely, by virtue of not being seen as clinician.
Exactly.
I'm doing the in inverted commas
Yeah.
sort of sign here, because yes, social workers are not clinicians. However, very often their work and the way how and the sort of therapeutic nature of
Yes.
relationship they build with people um, is very, very close to that sort of understanding of of what the work is being, what type of the work is being done. I hope it
Yeah,
makes
and absolutely. Yes, 100%. No, of course, you're making lots and lots of sense because is this ability to reflect, no? And because we also know that when we are sort of overwhelmed, if whatever the emotions that we are experiencing that comes from our work are becoming too much and too intense, that very capacity to reflect will be diminished.
Absolutely.
And that's, it's a natural reaction, is something that happens to all of us. We have episodes in which we have been talking with reflective practices, with reflective practice groups, with Marcela Urraca and with Dr. Verily Costa,
Yes.
touching on this very point, you know, in how, on the first place, organizations and teams can be developing this way of working that will include the understanding of what am I feeling and how are these feelings also playing a part in my practice. And it's about that. I think we are talking here about that necessary integration of these two elements.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's relevant to all human services.
Hmm.
You know, anyone who have direct contact with another human being, where they you know, and especially for sort of, you know, what I call helping profession. I mean, I'm not
Yes.
the only one
Is that what we're
referring to
called?
helping profession.
Yes. Yes.
But if there is an element of helping involved in this discussion, I think that there needs to be a space where the person who is the helper is able to really have that sort of space and an opportunity to
Mm.
look back at what is happening with them, and have that sort of, you know, ability to seek the support where they need to. Now, I think a lot of times we may realize that something is not right, but because we can't name it, because we feel that we might not be able to uh, to even identify what's happening. This could be also linked to the fact that we may feel shame that we are not coping.
Yes.
You know, that there's a number of elements there, depending on the person's own sort of circumstances, could be more or less visible. They
Yes, and
also,
also it is something about the organizational culture as well,
absolutely,
no? And how
absolutely,
much
absolutely.
sometimes this
Yeah.
idea of very hard work, and also
Yeah.
we have seen also in previous episodes what is the role of the managers and how
Mhm.
the manager's attitude towards work as well has
Absolutely.
such an important influence in how the rest of the team will approach their work.
Yes.
If we think about starting to clarify, give a little bit of light and clarification about the concepts that we are
Okay.
talking about,
Yeah.
what is compassion fatigue? What do you talk when you talk about compassion fatigue?
Right. You see, we have a number of different definitions, and
Hmm.
I think, considering that we just touched on the organizations and the emphasis on managers and the importance of organization itself, I think I'm going to start with one definition that really was close to my heart initially.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a definition of compassion fatigue, as seen by Kreitzer and colleagues. It's a fairly recent, 2020, and they see compassion fatigue as, and I'm going to quote that, byproduct of the workplace environments and the emotional demands of the caregiver, institutional factors, and how they create the condition for compassion fatigue. So it's not necessarily a definition of compassion fatigue as on its own, but they very closely put the experience of compassion fatigue closely they situate that experience within the organization, and you know, that concept of byproduct of the workplace environment and the demands. I think it's something that needs to be perhaps highlighted
Highlighted. Yes.
as
Yes.
a way of starting to think about compassion fatigue, and not being dismissive that sort of the elements that come directly from the institutions and organizations that those helpers or social workers in my case are working. And with that, and again following on what you mentioned, Roxana, is those organizations will have then a responsibility for creating a culture and creating a system within that organization that will start helping preventing compassion fatigue, through a number of different means. Now, another definition, and this one is potentially the one that this is what kind of helped me name what I wanna research, and this is the definition that comes directly from Charles Figley. I consider Charles Figley as one of my sort of early heroes when it comes to compassion fatigue. And
me too.
He started his work in many years ago. I think he put compassion fatigue on as a sort of term on, he presented it in a way that I think no one else did before him. So first of all, he started from acknowledging that the cost of caring, the very, very nature of helping profession. He talks about professionals who listen to clients' stories of fear, pain, and suffering may feel similar fear, pain, and suffering because they care. So
Yes.
I really appreciate the language that he uses, because it's not, he just names it the way it is. It's what he follows on with as well is that, ironically, the most effective therapists, helpers are the most vulnerable to experiencing the compassion fatigue. He sometimes talk about it as a mirroring or contagion effect, where they just they are so close with feeling the same what the person they're working with feeling, that they start experiencing the same sort of level of negative emotions that comes with those feelings. He talks about those who have enormous capacity for feeling and expressing empathy tend to be more at risk of compassionate stress. And you see, that very simple point, that very realization at the start of social work training, and let's face it, I think that there is a lot of research and understanding about who is attracted to this type of profession, to helping profession. It's not uncommon for social workers, therapists, psychologists, being attracted to the profession because of their own experiences, or because of the proximity to the experiences, which will make them actually brilliant at their work.
Yes.
But also, what Figley is saying, that puts, being brilliant at what you do means also that you need to be very, very careful about the impact on you. And again, the question I would ask, are we doing enough to teach how to recognize the impact? Are we doing enough to help our students, our newly qualified or early practitioners, to really effectively recognize and learn how to look after themselves in this space? So yeah.
Yes, and what will you, I mean, this also makes me think about different practices. Now we are touching on the organizational culture. We are touching on, the intention of, this desire of being good at your work and being quite empathic and so on. Do you think that there will be, or what do you consider unsafe practices for newly qualified social workers?
You see, a lot of things change over the years. A lot of research is being done on burnout. And I think maybe in terms of thinking about the terminology here, we need to kind of distinguish between the burnout and compassion fatigue. I think that there is a quite an ongoing polemic about what is the difference? Is there a difference? And then I think that there would be a number of different researchers and who work within that space that will have varying views. Now, because I started with Charles Figley, I will continue with that, and one of the elements that really helped me see compassion fatigue and secondary stress through a different lens was Figley's take on compassion fatigue. He would refer to compassion fatigue as a acute form of burnout. Whereas if we think about definition of Maslach and Jackson from, I think, 1986 of burnout, we're looking at a situation in which there is an accumulative effect of experiences over quite a lengthy period of time. So to capture the difference there, when I'm using Figley's lens there, we're talking about potential experience of compassion fatigue even after one incident of working with someone who is experiencing trauma in their life. So there is no need for this, there's no necessarily need for this lengthy accumulative stage.
I see.
And the warning there would be that potentially means that newly qualified social workers or early career practitioners will have their experiences that could be seen as very similar or very closely aligned with what would happen in burnout very early at the very beginning of their career. Now, I think what is important also to say is that recovering from burnout, from the burnout that is seen, that's understood as the very sort of effect of very kind of a long standing and accumulation over a period of time of working with trauma and those elements, is very different to what could happen if someone is recovering from compassion fatigue. And I think first, the understanding of what's happening with a person, ability to seek support in a sort of very early stage, but also ability and preparedness of people who are supporting newly qualified social workers or supporting students is crucial. Ability to develop skills to see, to understand their self-care, ability to effectively manage what is happening with them in terms of the emotional distress and what they're experiencing as a result of the relationship they have with people they work with. So yeah, a lot of research in social work in the quite difficult to even comprehend numbers of social workers that are leaving profession focuses on burnout. There isn't a focus necessarily on at the beginning. What happens before we reach the 5 or 6 year mark in which that person decides that I'm going to be a florist from tomorrow. I am not going to work with human beings in that sort of capacity anymore because I cannot do it anymore. You see what I mean? It's I'm using specifically I'm going to be a florist because this is if any of my colleagues from my frontline years practice will hear me, this is something I was referring to very, very frequently. I wanted to be a florist. And I become a social work academic instead.
Which is a very, very, we're very grateful that you made that choice. And funny enough, while you were talking, I was thinking in moments in which I thought, oh, it would be so nice to just learn how to do flower arrangements. And just dedicate my time to do that.
You and I both did. Yeah.
Very interesting, because you're talking about time and a timeline, no? And this sense of accumulation versus the reality of the impact in the here and now, even if it is just one person that you're working with, even if it is your first year. And that's the point of understanding that this can affect anyone with any level of expertise. It's not because you're too new or too old in the career. It's because simply we are human, and this is something that will affect us no matter what our level of expertise in this process.
Absolutely. And you see my research is quite unusual, because if you think about it, I didn't start the sort of research journey thinking, okay, I have to fix it. Because I, as optimistic as I can be, and I am, I feel that until you see something as existing phenomenon, no one will do anything about it. For me, there is no question over burnout in social work profession, and it's seen. And the reason why, because it's seen, there is interest in researching this area. There is funding to look at the area. But I feel that compassion fatigue on its own, I don't think that it's seen. In fact, very early when I started considering and thinking about the topic, I very much thought of it as the unspoken phenomenon. The something that is there, but no one really knows how to define it. And it may be to do with the fact that the current research, the information that are out there about compassion fatigue are somewhat conflicting. There is a different terminology. We're talking about secondary traumatic stress. We're talking about compassion fatigue. We're talking about vicarious traumatization. We're talking about so many different, we're using many different names for something that could be possibly closely related to describe as perhaps similar. So and that would create a bit of a mixed picture. And again, very often compassion fatigue is seen as a form of burnout, and it's not inaccurate, if that makes sense. But for me, there is something about that acuteness of that experience, and trying to capture that. And maybe that's why in the research design, in how I looked at the compassion fatigue as a phenomenon, it's really important for me to see the compassion fatigue as it is seen and experienced and understood directly by the newly qualified social workers who are experiencing it. Maybe that's why every time someone is asking me about the definition of compassion fatigue, I'm thinking, should I or should I not? Because I don't want to reach, the definition in someone's mind or someone's mouth. It is about, compassion fatigue will look differently for every single person who's experiencing it. And this is what I want to see in this research. This is what I would like to capture. And I really hope that maybe through, even through the research design, I was really hopeful to create a space in which newly qualified social workers who are I'm very grateful to everyone who is participating, by the way, if I may say so, that they have the space to truly reflect on what it is like for them. I'm using slightly different research methods. I have adapted a method of photo voice, in which newly qualified social workers are invited to first take photographs on what it is like for them to experience it. We use those photographs then in the interview. And the way I would like to show compassion fatigue as a result, at the end of this process, I would like to create an art exhibition in which those images are shared, the short stories that I would write based on newly qualified social workers interviews. They would really capture what compassion fatigue is like for these particular newly qualified social workers who are currently experiencing it, currently in practice, or they may have experienced it at some stage in their sort of early careers. Because I feel it's there is something about the uniqueness of the feeling.
Absolutely.
About it.
Yes, yes, I agree.
That's the most important part for me, was that to show compassion fatigue first, before we even start doing anything about it, seeing it, and hopefully, with this research, we will be able to accomplish it. And I'm saying we is because I'm just the person who is kind of perhaps the facilitator. The work is being done by the newly qualified social workers who who are willing to talk about it, who are willing to show it. I'm just gonna package it and put a display, but they're doing it, and I think that's what was important for me to, that's why I feel so passionate about this project.
Yes, and that very, very characteristic is that what is talking about the self-reflective aspect of it, no? Which is something that we have spoken in this podcast so many, many times, of the importance of understanding your personal reaction, no? And therefore, in that way, you understand your needs, and ultimately you can develop your own personally meaningful self-care strategy, because it needs to be personalized, as you say, because the nature of the experience is so personal, and it has a lot to do with our history, with who we are, and what are the motivations that we have to do our work, etc. There is so much in there that we can go into, but it's important to acknowledge as well of that uniqueness of the experience that makes more difficult as well to make definitions, or to create labels that people are so used to now. No, we are going opposite, in the opposite direction. No, in this conversation is also the emphasis there, in which the emphasis is then into paying attention to your personal experience, because that is what it counts when you want to understand it, when you want to think about what is that you need to maintain resilience. No,
and then this is what I also think is important. And then you named it, Roxana. What is it I need? What you need as a person is very different to what I might need as a person.
Absolutely.
So it's just kind of removing this I think that it's a very common theme across the services, and
yes,
in many different helping professions is this sort of drive to have the templates, drive to have the ready answers for everything, and actually I don't think that it's as simple as that. I think human beings are so complex that we just need to give ourselves a bit of credit there. And maybe the answers are not as difficult as we think, because it could be about asking what you need in that space. Having conscious understanding of that, you could ask that question: what is it you need?
And it's interesting, because what is coming to my mind with what we're talking about is yet a step further, no? That by allowing yourself to do this exploration and understanding your reactions and your feelings in front of your work is not an antidote for that not happening anymore. Is that we need to get used to the fact that because we are human, you will continue to have an emotional reaction, an emotional impact in front of the suffering that you are witnessing. Therefore, it's about having this ongoing kind of practice that will allow you to continue to maintain that some level of self-awareness, some level of self-understanding, some level of self-care, that then in the long run will sort of create a little bit of a buffer, because it's a constant process, as you were saying, no, that it will not, it really, it doesn't stop. But there are so many ways that you can then create that buffer, that resilience, that sense of, of practicing from that place of self-awareness and understanding of yourself. Absolutely. I don't know if I'm making sense.
No, you are. And I think it's something also about an understanding that it is okay to feel the things that because very often I would see people's difficulty to say, okay, well, I'm experiencing something, I will shut that down, and I will not talk about it and pretend
Yes.
that it's not there.
Mm-hmm.
And you see, this is the perfect recipe to kind of lead us, 5 years down the line to burnout and change of profession,
And becoming
Um,
florist and,
yeah,
and flower
exactly. And
arrangers.
exactly. But then the more space and ability we have to acknowledge that this is happening. What is it?
Mm-hmm.
What can I do with it?
Mm-hmm.
And actually having this, I'm thinking that it goes beyond the skill of the person, because, as you say, while they experience and continue experiencing, they will be able to work through that. They be able or not, depends on their circumstances. But
Yes.
acknowledging that it's happening and learning and being able to reflect on it is one thing, but
Mm-hmm.
also how organizations and how other professionals in the supportive roles, how are they enabling that space for
Yes.
the newly qualified social workers or for students to be able to explore that to be able to work with it effectively, without a shame, without guilt, without feeling that they mustn't do it, or that it's not happening, or pretending that it's not happening, feeling safe enough to acknowledge that it's part of the human experience, and it's
Yes.
okay to do that. It's okay to do that. It's almost like there need to be a overall understanding that permission to feel it
Yes.
to happen before anything else happens. Yeah, I don't know if it makes sense, but I think
Yeah, absolutely.
that's how I see it.
Yeah,
And
because
I yeah. Yeah.
naturally we will I think we are used to, I'm sure I'm making a massive generalization here, but it is this tendency we want to avoid pain. Is a natural thing to do too. So, and depending on our own upbringing and everything
Yeah,
that
yeah,
we have experienced in life, we will have a different relationship with our own emotions.
yeah.
Some will bottle them down, some will experience them as a very overwhelming, etc. No, from the emotion that we experience, some kind of coping mechanism will come up, no, and we all have them, and
Yeah.
we all use them somehow. The more we
However helpful
understand
or
them,
unhelpful they might be.
exactly, and that's the thing, that if we do have access to these spaces where there is safe to have that reflective practice, then probably we will be able to implement more healthy coping mechanisms instead of the unhealthy ones.
But it is very interesting to actually use this methodology where participants they first present the images and they name them. They would have the either a short narrative or a title for each image, and how that they use those images in telling their story, in telling their talking about their experience. And I love the fact that if you were to look at those images
Mm-hmm.
with no narrative, you
Mm-hmm.
probably you would never ever thought of this being representation of compassion fatigue. You would never even, it wouldn't cross your mind.
Mm-hmm.
But when all of a sudden, when you have that image and you have the story, and it kind of connects, it's actually significantly more powerful and very unique to the person who talks about it. And I think that's why I feel it's an enormous privilege for me to be in that space, to see it, to kind of to almost touch it.
Absolutely. Yes.
But because there is something about very very unique nature of it. And so yeah, there are a few things that I I can say I'm start seeing them.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I go back to what I mentioned before. It's about showing compassion fatigue,
Yes. Yeah.
showing uh,
Mm-hmm.
the phenomenon,
Yeah.
showing how newly qualified social workers understand it, how they interpret it, and how they experience it, how they kind of build and create that meaning around what is happening to them. And yeah, when I have all my data, and I'm still collecting the data, and it's an ongoing invitation, because it's one of this perhaps unusual research where you don't simply collect data and analyze it. I tend to receive the images and do the interview of one newly qualified social worker before I see another person, and it kind of
Mm-hmm.
it's a kind of a rolling situation. So there is a continuous a call for participation. So if any newly qualified social workers are listening to us right now, I would be most grateful for them to reach out and contact me, because because the more participants are willing to go through this process with me, I think that the richer picture we're gonna have, picture metaphorically, we're gonna have in the end, because we're gonna have many pictures of compassion fatigues at the end. But yeah,
Yes.
I hope to learn a lot through that process, and I really hope that we will be able to jointly will be able to show that it is real, and that
Yes.
the reality of it is different to every one of us.
Definitely. So the invitation is there for all the newly qualified social workers, and I'm so looking forward for that photo exhibition as well. That will be part of the results of this research that you're doing, because it's something about that visual
Mm,
aspect, no, and how much we have images in our minds sometimes for things, and to put that on a photograph
mm,
is it makes it so much powerful
yeah,
in the realization and awareness that this is real.
mm,
This is something that happens to everyone working in the helping professions, and that we need to pay attention to it. No, it's
yeah.
such a powerful way. I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing. So if we think about we have been working a lot about this idea of prevention of compassion fatigue, no? But I
Mhm.
think I would like to reiterate that this is not something that you necessarily will stop happening,
Yeah.
but it is there, no?
Mhm.
Is there any preventive or sort of any actions that you feel will be useful for newly qualified social workers, and so they can start to develop their self-care strategies, their self-care repertoire?
I'm going to go back to the very definition I mentioned at the very at the beginning. It comes from the Kreiser's work, when when they were looking at the organizations and the byproduct of
Mm-hmm.
workplace environment. There was something very important that I felt that there was said in their first very important beginning of the prevention of compassion fatigue as it relates to systemic factors in
Mm-hmm.
view is education.
Uh-huh.
And that's where where we potentially looking at the starting point for me, that I even though I was thinking about the research when I was in frontline practice, I felt that I didn't have enough scope and ability to even start that. But now being in a sort of this privileged world of academia, I feel like
Mm-hmm.
I can do that. But also, having the experience of working directly with students, social work students, I see more and more how this quote from 2020, the
Mm-hmm.
Kreiser's work, has some sort of it kind of speaks to me,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because there is, for me, there is something about teaching and learning. There is something about that point in which student social workers are preparing for frontline practice. And if you think about it, our social work degrees, they have elements of practice built in there.
Mm-hmm.
Social work England, our regulator, expects that for anyone who would like to qualify as a social worker, they need to complete 170 days placements during their degrees.
Uh-huh.
Several months of practice built in
Absolutely.
their teaching and learning, while they're developing their skills and abilities. So that's a huge amount of um uh, focus. And the question for me is, is there something about, within this period, and not only during the student's placement, but within the time they have with higher education institutions that are in their practice, is there enough space and emphasis on that very element? And I go back to the beginning. Is there enough emphasis, or is there perhaps something that we could be doing differently or better, or
and what a good opportunity, no? That there is there. It is there, and it happens through the process of training. So why not? Not to add another layer.
Yeah, I think it's happened. It started happening already. I think that there are a number of universities who are paying, more emphasis, and then obviously our students will have opportunities to practice on placement in different institutions, and those institutions will have different cultures, as you mentioned, and through that they will have this very, very positive experiences. But my worry is that there is no consistency. It's not, there is no, it's not the same everywhere. So we will have one student who will have an amazing experience, and we have another student who will not have the same experience. So again, maybe I'm pushing buttons on our social work regulators to raise the bar and expectation that we include this element and emphasize that element as something that needs to be directly addressed. And there is a lot on resilience, there is a lot on self-help, but my worry is there's enough for us as educators to really take it seriously enough to up the game a bit. Again,
yes, what I hear from what you're saying. But what I hear from what you're saying is this challenge to go from the theory to the practice. So how people can actually implement certain activities that are part of their practice that will allow them to have then a healthy relationship with the potential impact of the work.
Yeah, especially that reflection and ability to reflect.
Exactly.
It's such integral necessary skill that students are developing during the time at the universities, especially. I think that there is an opportunity to take a look at it and take think about how we can maybe take it a bit further.
We will definitely continue to have that, hold on that thought of hope and inspiration and positivity around this as well, because it can be a very painful topic too for those that are taking the risk to connect with that sense of awareness and to connect a little bit deeper with all of those emotions and the consequences as well of not having those reflective space, those reflective moments that will allow them to process. No, I think for me the accumulation as well is about having so much information in your brain that you cannot longer add anymore, that you need to start to process some of it, because that will also allow a space for in having joy as well, and connecting with joy and love and happiness within the practice of the careers that you have chosen with so much love. No,
exactly. And it just really kind of that love then can come out, that joy and love and a passion can resurface in a space where the person is able to really enjoy it, rather than suffering with those who are suffering. And
exactly.
I'm not saying that you see what I mean. It's I think there is something about that, the sort of the healthy, again, I'm using the healthy way of working.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, we have reached the end of this episode. Aga, well, I cannot express how deeply grateful and excited I am about finding and getting to know more and more about your research and what will come out of all of that, to get to be at that presentation and art presentation with the photographs and the understanding of compassion fatigue, and to tell to everybody that is listening, First, if you are a newly qualified social worker, get in touch in England.
In England.
In England, yes. Okay.
Yes.
Get in touch with Aga. We will be adding all the links and information and necessarily for you to do so in the description of this episode, but also for anybody that is listening that found useful information here in this episode, just help us to help share it, help us to spread the word and the understanding. And thank you so very much for being there and
Thank
listening.
you so much for having me.
Thank you, Aga.